Hi, friends. My name is Miss Susan. I'm Sam and Charlie's mom, and I have been asked to read the Bible story for you for Bible school for one of these days this week. And I'm so excited to do it. Our story today is about stormy weather and how Jesus is there with us to help us through the stormy times of our lives. So this particular story, the one I'm going to share with you, is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. And so I am going to read that with you. It's important to note that there's also this same story was retold by some of the other disciples and other authors of some of the Gospels. So you can actually find lots of examples of storms and how Jesus reacted during these storms in the Bible. So this is just one of several stories. So let me read with you. Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." Peter, one of the disciples, answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And so that is our story from Matthew. You can also find the same story in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 45 to 51, or Luke 8, 22 to 25. And so I want to just talk to you a little bit because it seems like we as a country, as a community, we have been dealing with some stormy weather of our own recently. And I don't just mean, thunder and lightning and rain. We've had that, but we've also had some other times in our lives recently that have maybe felt kind of stormy. The same feelings that maybe you get during a storm. We recently, just the other day, had a storm that came up. We were, having a nice time outside, and then literally out of nowhere, it seemed like, there were dark gray clouds, and the raindrops began to fall, and the thunder began to rumble, and you saw flashes of lightning, and it could be a little bit scary. It can make you anxious because that's, tricky weather. And so, I want you to think for a minute some of the feelings that you have when you experience stormy weather, whether it be a physical storm or sort of metaphorical, like when we have difficult times in our lives and how that makes you feel. And so the disciples in this story, they were in a very vulnerable situation. They were in a boat out on the waters, and they then started to experience this stormy weather. And it made them very nervous, very anxious. And, they were very, very concerned, many of them. And when Jesus enters into the story, because you got to remember at the beginning of this story, when it began, Jesus was not in the boat with them. Jesus had told them, instructed them to go ahead in the boat, and he had gone up onto the mountaintop to pray. So I want you to think about, if you had been a disciple in the boat, what would be some of the feelings you would have had or experienced? And, would you have called out for help? Would you have been anxious? That sort of thing. And then, if you remember, the disciples saw somebody walking on the sea. And the scripture says that they were terrified, saying it was a ghost. Is it a ghost? And they cried out in fear. And Jesus was able to speak to them and calm them with his calming voice. He said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And so it's interesting in the story how right away, right after that happens, not only is it sort of miraculous that you have Jesus walking on the water, but you have Peter, one of the disciples, having faith and trusting in Jesus. And he gets out of the boat and, basically says, "Lord, if it's you, I believe it is you. If it's you, instruct me, help me to come to you." And so Peter gets out of the boat when Jesus says, "Come." He gets out of the boat and starts walking towards Jesus. And so, he is very much, Jesus is in control of this situation, and he says, "Come." And Peter steps out of the boat and comes towards him. But then in the story, it's interesting. Notice what happens. He says, the scripture says, Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when meaning Peter, when Peter noticed a strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me." So he got distracted by the wind a little bit and lost his focus and lost his, eyes on Jesus, focus on Jesus, and having that faith. He sort of wobbled in his faith a little bit. But guess what then happened? He said, "Lord, save me." Peter said, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out and said, "You of little faith, why do you doubt?" And he caught him and protected him and, instilled that faith and trust and love in him once again. And so this is a great story for us, especially because, things have been a little bit scary and concerning recently, with all the uncertainties that we are experiencing. But it's important that during these times, you realize the power of God, the power of God to walk on water, the power of God to calm the storms in our lives, and, the ability and the power to catch us when we're sinking and when we're falling. And so one of the things I love about this story is that it is filled with so much hope, and we can hold on to that by trusting in God, knowing that God is at work through all these difficult and stormy times. He is here with us, ready to reach out his hand and raise us up and hold on to us and take care of us. So as you are thinking about, things and, when you have worries and uncertainties and when times get stormy, remember this scripture from Matthew, this story about Jesus and how we all have times when we doubt, and we all have times when we are uncertain and scared and worried and anxious, but have faith in Jesus. He is here to lift us up. So I hope that you will sit down with your family or a brother or a sister or a friend and talk about your feelings and talk about the ways that you are feeling the stormy weather. but then remind each other that even in the stormiest of storms, the stormiest weather, that Jesus is there for us. So I hope everyone is doing well. I miss seeing your smiling faces, and I can't wait. I look forward to, and I'm so hopeful and optimistic about when we will be together again. Take care.